Hello and congratulations on getting access to this video course on learning how to speed up your WordPress site. Now, there are a lot of different advantages to speeding up your site in pertaining to user experience and of course to getting better rankings with Google and other search engines. So that's what we're going to be covering in this video course. So this is video number 1, which is the introduction and getting started. So first things first, I want to talk about mindsets because I'm a big believer of getting in the right mindset before you get started. So knowing that this is a constant ongoing process is key. You're not going to be able to finish everything all in one day. In fact, speeding up your website, there are so many different variables, different elements. In fact, we're just going to focus on a few, but we're going to focus on the big ones that will help you speed up your whole site, typically about anywhere from 50 to 75%. Now, this is an ongoing process, and I want you to know that. It's like getting a car, a brand new car. You're going to need to constantly maintain it. So just remember that it takes baby steps to complete each and one of these, so don't get overwhelmed. Get a few steps done first, move on, and go from there. So with that said, what I want to do now is give you a quick overview of what's inside this video course. Video number 1 is the introduction, obviously, this video here. Video number 2 is we're going to talk about the advantages of fast site speed. So we talked briefly about the search engine ranking and of course the user experience, but we'll talk more about that in depth. Video number 3, we're going to talk about reasons why your site is slow. So although obviously in order to learn how to speed up your site, we need to get you to understand what is slowing your site down. And you might have already seen this, you just didn't know how to speed it up. Or you might have observed this, but you didn't know what was going on. So now you will know. Video number 4, we're going to talk about too much in your site, meaning things in your site, plugins, things that are slowing it down that you could potentially remove. Video number 5, we're going to talk about, is your web host slowing you down? Which definitely a lot of web hosting companies, not the company itself, but the plan that you might be on might be slowing you down. In fact, I've talked to several businesses about this, and many of them did not know that their web hosting plan was actually slowing them down about 50%. In video number 6, we're going to talk about image optimization. So in other words, compressing your images so that they load fast. And video number 7, we're going to talk about parasite protection. Yes, indeed, there are parasites out there. In other words, people who are possibly linking to you or even hijacking your site or using your resources. How do you protect against them? Video number 8, we're going to talk about caching. And of course, video number 9, we're going to talk about content delivery networks, which will help people around the globe access your website at a faster rate. And I'll talk more about why not having a content delivery network will actually slow down your user experience. All right, so before we move on to video number 2, let's talk about what you need to have in hand. Obviously, this is made for WordPress sites. You can take this information and the concepts that I'm giving you and apply that to a non-WordPress site, but I'm going to give you specifics in relation to WordPress. And of course, web hosting specifically for WordPress sites, we'll discuss this later, and you'll need to have a cPanel for hotlink protection. Most hosts provide cPanel. If you're not using cPanel, then most likely you do have hotlink protection on it that is typically built in. And of course, you will need to have extra money for possible content delivery networks and image optimization. So let's move on to video number 2. Hello and welcome back. This is video number 2. So let's talk about the advantages of having a website that loads really, really fast. So you already have a glimpse of why site speed is important, but to ensure that we're on the same page, let's discuss why you need to speed up your WordPress site. Now, like I said earlier, there are two major factors at play here. First, we have user experience, and of course, secondly, we have search engine ranking factors. Now, they're both very important, but in reality, you should focus on making sure that the user experience is the best it can be, because if you can think about it, that is who you are trying to impress. That is who you're trying to engage, and ultimately that is who is going to take action, whether that be sign up on your list, buy your product, follow you, become your fan of your brand. So ultimately, like I said, that is who you're trying to impress. Because at the end of the day, even though Google and other search engines change their algorithm, if you look at a long-term view, getting that user the best experience possible will actually impact your search engine ranking. Because at the end of the day, Google and other search engines, their goal is to impress upon the person who is looking for your website. They go to Google, they search, and that is their customer. You are not Google's customer. That is their customer. So that is your customer as well. All right. So it's easy to get in the mindset of, oh, I just want to get rankings, I just want to get traffic. But what then? You get the traffic and then the person who's coming to your site isn't interested and they skip your site and they go to somebody else's. If you impress upon them, you will impress Google. Now, if you think about it for just a second, as information becomes easily accessible within seconds, the human attention span actually gets shorter and shorter. If you think about back in the day, like decades ago, when we didn't have the internet, information was not easily accessible. And because it is now and the demand for data increases and people's patience become shorter, they're able to get information instantly with their smartphones and their tablets and all of that. The patience essentially becomes shorter. So their patience becomes shorter. And as it becomes shorter, so does their patience for your site load speed. So it just makes sense when you look at it that way. The longer your visitors stay, the lower your bounce rate is, which is a technical term for prospects leaving your site. So your goal at the end of the day is to get a lower bounce rate. You don't want a higher bounce rate, you want a lower bounce rate. For example, if somebody goes to Google and they type in a keyword phrase, let's say scuba diving, and they come to your website, they leave, and they go back to Google within seconds. This is what we call bounce rate. If you have a lot of people, let's say out of 100 people, you have 99 people that come to your website and within seconds leave and then go back to Google, Google can detect this and they can see that, okay, for some weird reason, people are going to your site and leaving within seconds. So your site must not be relevant. Your site must not be what they're looking for. And therefore, we're going to rank you lower. All right. So if a large amount of people are doing this, then Google knows that your site is irrelevant. It doesn't have good content, or even if it does, that is what they assume, or the site loads slowly. So if you think about it from that kind of standpoint and you adjust the user experience to be the best it can be, you will actually win the Google search engine game. And that is how you kill two birds with one stone. In other words, win in both areas by really focusing on the user experience first, and then the SEO and all that will come along the way. And even if you're not 100% being optimized to SEO, you will win the game in the long run because people will love your site. So out of 100 people, you may have 50 people who come and go, but you'll have 50 people who stay for anywhere from 15 minutes to 30 minutes to an hour. And that tells Google you will have a 50% bounce rate. So 50% of the people are coming and then going, but 50% of the people are staying and they're liking your content. Now, if you have a lower bounce rate, let's say, for example, 10%, and then the 90 out of 100 people are staying for a long period of time, that tells Google, hey, wait a minute, this site must be extremely relevant. People are obviously staying on the site for a long period of time, and therefore this site must be relevant, this site must be good, and we'll rank it higher. You see what I mean? So now that you have a basic premise of what to look for and what to focus on, let's move on to video number 3 and talk about what slows your site down. Hello and welcome back. This is video number 3, and we're going to talk about reasons why your site is slow. Now, to understand how to speed your site up, you really need to understand first and foremost what is slowing it down. Now, there are hundreds and hundreds of different variables, but our goal here is the 20/80 rule, meaning we're going to find the most common variables, focus on them, that will give you the large amount of impact. So a little bit tweaks here and there, which will give you the biggest impact. And that is our goal here. And instead of trying to teach you hundreds of different variables, which would be time consuming and very overwhelming. So what I advise you to do is implement each one of these one by one. Each one of these can take a good amount of time, some of them less, some of them more, but some of these will make a huge, huge impact on how fast your site loads. And they are, number 1, your WordPress site has just way too many things in it. It's bloated with too much code, with too much plugins, with too much pages, posts, images, everything. It just has way too much in it. If you think about even your computer, if you add too many things onto your PC or your Mac computer as an analogy here, then your computer will become slower and slower and slower, right? So same concept here as well. Your WordPress site just has too many things. Your web hosting is just too slow. That's another big reason we found over the years. We've taken sites from one host and put it on another host, and it was faster. So sometimes the plan that you're under can actually impact how slow and how fast your site loads. Now, bear in mind that the reality is that WordPress sites, in general, after they have become bloated, they use a lot of CPU and server resources. Now, I want to be clear here to say that when you install WordPress by default with nothing on it, it usually runs very, very fast. It's usually because things are added to it like plugins, like images, like other code that tends to slow it down. And another issue is that the majority of websites are hosted on shared hosting. And we'll talk more about that in that particular video, but because it is on shared hosting, you're essentially sharing a server with 100 or more other people, and of course, they will impact your site. So it's not necessarily that you're doing anything wrong. If you have other people on that server that are rocking the boat or doing something, crashing the server, then you're affected as well. And that simply means that your whole website will become slow because with shared hosting, you are sharing the server with hundreds of other people. And either you're sharing a house essentially with hundreds of other people. And we'll discuss this later on. Number 3, your images are way too big. One thing that a lot of us forget about is that different people have different internet speeds. Some are on slower speeds, some are on faster speeds. And just because you have a faster speed doesn't necessarily mean that everybody else has a faster speed. So even if it loads fast with you, it may not run fast with other people. So that's just something to bear in mind. Your images are way too big and they need to be squeezed down. Now, this has always been a problem even decades ago. And according to Google, images often take about 60% of total page weight. In other words, they take up too much room and you need to size them down. And this means that most websites are being slowed down because they have way too many images that are just taking too long to load. So we'll discuss how to optimize all of your images at once or one by one, and how to speed that process up. In fact, I remember back decades ago, when you optimized your images, a lot of times you would have to do it with Photoshop, and you would have to do it one by one, which really can become a pain. But nowadays, there are plugins out there, and there are platforms out there and software applications that will help you essentially speed up and optimize all of your images all at once without ever having to get Photoshop. The next one is hot linking. This means somebody else is linking to your site, your images, your videos, essentially. And what they're doing is they're sending traffic to those images and videos, be getting people that don't even know that it's your images, and they're just stealing your images. And if that's the case, they're essentially using your bandwidth and your server resources. The next thing is caching. Caching is essentially what your internet browser does when you visit sites on a regular basis, and then your browser usually saves tons and tons of images and other files, HTML files and CSS and other files, so that when you go back to that website at a later date, it's already sitting on your computer, and therefore it loads super fast. So you can do the same thing with WordPress, but you need to tell it to do it a certain way. And of course, we'll be discussing this in relation to your WordPress site and all of that. The next thing is content delivery networks. And usually what happens here is when you host a website, let's say, for example, that the web hosting server that you put your website on is in the United States. What that means is that if somebody is on the other side of the world, let's say, for example, the United Kingdom or Australia or Canada or even the Philippines or Russia or anywhere else, and they come to your website, essentially what their computer has to do is it has to travel all the way through the internet, all the way to the USA server just to view your website. So as you can imagine, that will literally slow things down to a halt. So even if it runs super, super fast on your side, they have to go all the way over there or vice versa, and it's really going to slow things down, especially if your customer base is all over the world. If that's the case, this is a definite must, and you'll see why in just a minute. So CDNs are basically web hosting data centers that are positioned all over the world. So all the places that I mentioned just now, let's say, for example, that you're using a CDN, and those servers are placed strategically all over the world, close to those people. So when somebody goes to your website, instead of having to travel all the way back to the USA, they essentially are going to go to that location that is nearest to them. So that's what a CDN is all about, and those can be very, very powerful. We'll talk about the different types of CDNs out there as we've tested numerous ones. And with that said, we'll move on to video number 4.